I'm going to tell you something that frightened me more at 93 than losing my eyesight ever did. It was the quiet morning when I reached for the edge of my kitchen table just to stand up. And for one brief moment, I wondered if that little hesitation was the beginning of losing the life I loved. Many people think growing older means accepting that their legs will grow weaker, their world will become smaller, and one day someone else will decide where they live. I believed that for a little while too, and those thoughts stole more sleep from me than any ache ever could. But over the years, I noticed something that refused to leave my mind. I met men and women in their 80s and 90s who still carried groceries, tended gardens, laughed easily, and walked with quiet confidence. They did not all have the same money, the same family, or even the same country. Yet they seemed to share a handful of ordinary habits that most people overlooked. I often wondered why. I am not a doctor, and I have never claimed to know the secrets hidden inside medical books. I am simply a woman who has lived long enough to watch children become grandparents and to see fashions, governments, and opinions come and go. What stayed with me were the small lessons life repeated over and over until I finally paid attention. I learned that independence is rarely lost in one dramatic moment. It often slips away through tiny choices we stop noticing. That realization changed how I looked at every breakfast, every walk, every conversation, and every quiet evening spent alone. Looking back now, I can honestly say that the foods on my table mattered, but they were never the whole story. Throughout my life, I noticed that the people who remained strong the longest seemed to feed something deeper than their bodies. They protected their hope just as carefully as they protected their health. They found reasons to wake up, reasons to smile, and reasons to believe tomorrow was still worth preparing for. I did not understand that lesson when I was younger. In fact, I learned it only after life placed me in front of a loss so painful that I almost stopped caring what happened to me next. If you have ever wondered whether it is already too late to make a difference after 60, 70, or even 80, please stay with me, because the story I am about to share began with one of the darkest seasons of my life, and it started because of a conversation I never expected to have with a remarkable old friend whose quiet wisdom changed the way I have lived ever since. When I was 68 years old, I believed my life had quietly divided itself into two parts. There was the life I had shared with my husband, filled with ordinary mornings, warm conversations, and dreams we never thought twice about. Then there was the silence that followed after he passed away. No one prepares you for the sound of an empty house. It is not loud, but it settles into every room until you begin to wonder if you are disappearing with it. My children worried about me, though they tried not to show it. They would ask if I needed help with shopping or cooking, and I always smiled and told them I was managing just fine. The truth was different. I was beginning to fear that one day I would no longer be able to manage it all. I imagined someone else making decisions about my home, my meals, and even when I should wake up in the morning. That fear stayed hidden inside me because I did not want to burden anyone with it. Then one Saturday, while buying fresh vegetables at a small local market, I met a gentleman who looked far younger than his years. His back was straight, his steps were steady, and he carried two heavy baskets without the slightest complaint. Someone told me he was well into his 80s, and I could hardly believe it. We started talking while waiting for apples to be weighed, and before long he smiled and said something I have never forgotten. He told me that growing old does not begin with gray hair. It begins the day we stop believing we are worth caring for. Those words stayed with me long after I returned home. Over the following months, I found excuses to visit the market on the same day each week because I hoped to see him again. Every conversation left me with another small piece of wisdom. He never spoke about miracle cures or expensive supplements. Instead, he talked about simple meals prepared with care, about walnuts he enjoyed almost every afternoon, bowls of oatmeal that gave him a comforting start to the day, blueberries he picked whenever they were in season, and the satisfaction of finishing each meal before feeling too full. I noticed that he spoke about food the same way he spoke about friendship, gratitude, and faith. To him, they belonged together. At first, I wondered if such ordinary habits could truly make any difference after so many years. Yet the more I watched him, the more another question grew inside me. If his secret was not hidden in a bottle or a complicated plan, then what was the one habit he believed mattered even more than everything he ate? That answer surprised me more than any food ever could. The more time I spent talking with that remarkable gentleman, the more I realized he never measured a healthy life by the number of birthdays someone celebrated. He paid attention to something much simpler. He watched how people stood up from a chair, how they carried themselves when no one was looking, and whether they still found joy in ordinary tasks. That made me curious, because throughout my long life I had met many people who reached 90 but seemed tired of living, while others in their 80s still spoke about tomorrow as if it were a precious gift waiting to be opened. I often wondered what separated those two paths. Little by little, I began changing my own daily routine, not because I expected miracles, but because I wanted to give myself every reasonable chance to remain independent. I started keeping a small bowl of walnuts on my kitchen table instead of cookies. Many older people believe simple foods prepared by nature deserve a place in every home, and over time I noticed I felt satisfied without reaching for so many sweet treats. I also began adding blueberries to my breakfast whenever I could find them. Researchers continue studying the many colorful compounds inside berries, and some studies suggest they may help support healthy aging as part of a balanced diet. I cannot tell you exactly what happened inside my body, but I can tell you what happened inside my heart. Preparing that simple breakfast reminded me each morning that I was still worth caring for. Soon afterward, broccoli became a regular guest at my dinner table. For years I had overcooked it until it lost both its color and its character. My old friend laughed kindly when I told him that. He said food should still look alive when it reaches the plate. That little sentence stayed with me. Then came sardines, something I had ignored for decades because they seemed too ordinary to matter. Yet I met fishermen in a coastal village who had eaten them all their lives, and many of them remained surprisingly active well into old age. I remembered their steady hands and cheerful conversations more than the fish itself. Slowly I added beans, eggs, oatmeal, and natural cottage cheese to my weekly meals. None of these foods felt expensive or fashionable. They simply became familiar companions in my kitchen. But something even more important was changing without me noticing. Every small habit whispered the same message. I had not given up on myself. And then, during one quiet afternoon, my elderly friend shared a lesson that had nothing to do with food at all, yet it became the foundation beneath every healthy choice I made afterward. For a long time, I believed the biggest mistakes people made as they grew older had something to do with the wrong foods. After all, that is what we hear most often. Eat this, avoid that, buy something new, follow the latest trend. But after living for more than 90 years and watching friends from many walks of life, I slowly came to a different conclusion. The greatest mistake was not found on the dinner plate. It began much earlier, in the quiet moment when someone decided that growing older meant they no longer deserved the same care they had once given everyone else. I saw wonderful people spend decades looking after their children, their spouses, and even their neighbors, while forgetting to look after themselves. Then, when their strength began to fade, they blamed their age instead of the habits they had quietly abandoned. My old friend once smiled and told me that every choice we repeat becomes a vote for the person we are becoming. I thought about those words for many days. They sounded simple, yet they explain so much. Throughout my life, I noticed that the strongest older people rarely chased dramatic changes. They respected ordinary routines. They ate enough without eating too much. They enjoyed fresh fruits and vegetables when they could. They moved every day, even if it was only a gentle walk around the yard or a few careful stretches before breakfast. Many people notice that these small actions seem to support their energy better than constantly searching for quick answers. Another mistake I often saw was believing that one healthy food could erase a lifetime of neglect. Researchers continue studying how different foods may help support healthy aging, but no single meal can replace daily consistency. I learned that lesson slowly. Some mornings I still wanted to skip breakfast or spend the whole afternoon sitting in my favorite chair. Yet every time I chose the easier path, tomorrow seemed just a little harder. On the days I prepared my oatmeal, added a few berries, enjoyed an egg, or shared a simple meal with a friend, I felt as though I was reminding myself that life was still worth participating in. The most surprising lesson, however, had nothing to do with nutrition at all. It was the realization that loneliness could quietly steal a person's strength long before illness ever did. I watched neighbors who stopped visiting others slowly lose their curiosity, their confidence, and even their desire to leave the house. That discovery made me ask a question that changed everything. If food nourishes the body, what nourishes the heart enough to keep the body wanting to move? The answer came from an unexpected Saturday morning that I will never forget. That Saturday morning began like many others. I carried a basket of homemade bread to the local community center because someone had asked if I could help with a small gathering. I expected to stay for half an hour, smile politely, and return home before lunch. Instead, I found a room full of older people repairing old chairs, polishing wooden tables, sewing blankets, and packing food boxes for families who needed a little help. No one looked rushed. No one complained about aching knees or growing older. They simply worked together, laughed together, and shared stories while their hands stayed busy. I remember standing quietly in the doorway, wondering why the room felt so alive. Then my old friend looked at me and said, "When your hands have a purpose, your heart usually finds one too." Those words settled deeply inside me. From that week forward, I started spending every Saturday there. I was never the strongest person in the room, and I certainly was not the fastest. I simply repaired small pieces of furniture, folded donated clothes, and made tea for anyone who wanted a warm cup. At first, I believed I was helping other people. After several months, I realized they had been helping me just as much. I woke up each Saturday with a reason to get dressed, prepare a healthy breakfast, and leave the house with a smile. Researchers continue studying how social connections may support healthy aging, and many older people believe that feeling useful helps them remain mentally and physically active. I cannot explain every reason, but I know what I experienced. My steps became more confident because they always had somewhere meaningful to go. My thoughts grew lighter because I spent less time worrying about myself. Throughout my life, I noticed that the happiest older adults were rarely the ones who had the most possessions. They were the ones who still believed they had something valuable to offer. One gentleman sharpened gardening tools for neighbors who could no longer do it themselves. A widow knitted tiny blankets for premature babies at the local hospital. Another friend visited people who rarely received visitors and simply listened to their stories. None of these acts made newspaper headlines, yet each one seemed to bring fresh life into the people who gave their time. Looking back now, I think many of us search for the perfect fruit or the perfect vegetable while forgetting that the human heart also hungers for kindness, gratitude, and purpose. The walnuts, oatmeal, beans, berries, eggs, and vegetables remained part of my daily meals, but they no longer felt like isolated habits. They became part of a larger promise I made to myself every morning to care for my body because I still had someone to encourage, someone to help, and another day worth living. Yet there was one quiet morning ritual that tied all these lessons together, and it became the habit I treasure more than any other. Every morning now begins almost the same way, and perhaps that is why I treasure it so much. Before I look out the window or think about everything waiting for me, I sit quietly for a few moments and whisper a simple word of gratitude. It is not a complicated prayer. Tea is simply my way of reminding myself that another day has been placed gently into my hands. I have noticed that when I begin the morning with thankfulness, I make kinder choices for the rest of the day. I prepare a bowl of oatmeal instead of reaching for something overly sweet. I add a handful of blueberries when they are in season, or slices of fresh fruit if they are not. Some mornings I enjoy an egg, a little natural cottage cheese, or a few walnuts. These foods have become familiar friends, not because I believe they perform miracles, but because they help me build a routine that feels steady and comforting. Researchers continue studying how simple, nutrient rich foods may help support healthy aging, and many older people believe that consistency matters more than perfection. That has certainly been true in my own life. I also try to move a little every day. Some days it is only a gentle walk to the mailbox or around my small garden. Other days I spend a little longer tending flowers or pulling weeds. I no longer measure success by how far I can walk or how fast I can move. Instead, I ask myself one quiet question. Did I give my body a reason to stay active today? Most evenings, the answer is yes, and that is enough for me. I have also learned not to be too hard on myself. There are days when I feel tired, when my joints remind me of my age, or when memories make my heart a little heavy. On those days, I simply begin again with the next meal, the next walk, or the next kind conversation. Growing older has taught me that health is not built through perfect days. It is shaped by returning to good habits again and again with patience. If you are over 60 and wondering where to begin, I would gently suggest starting with only one small change. Perhaps add one wholesome food you enjoy. Perhaps take a short walk after breakfast. Perhaps call a friend you have not spoken with for too long. There is no prize for changing everything overnight. In my experience, lasting change grows quietly, just like a tree whose roots become stronger long before anyone notices its branches. And tomorrow morning, when I tell you about the simple ritual that still fills my heart with hope at more than 90 years of age, you may discover that the greatest secret was never hidden in my kitchen at all. This morning, just as I have done for many years, I opened my front door before the sun had fully climbed into the sky. I stood there with a warm cup in my hands, listened to the birds greeting another day, and took one slow, careful breath. At my age, mornings have become precious. I no longer rush through them because I have learned that every peaceful beginning shapes the hours that follow. Sometimes I smile when I remember the frightened woman I once was, convinced that growing older meant slowly surrendering everything that mattered. If I could sit beside that younger version of myself today, I would gently hold her hand and tell her not to lose hope. I would tell her that independence is protected one ordinary day at a time. It grows through simple meals prepared with care, gentle movement that keeps the body awake, honest conversations that lighten the heart, and the courage to believe that life still has something beautiful waiting around the next corner. I never found one magical food that solved every problem. Instead, I found that walnuts, blueberries, broccoli, beans, eggs, oatmeal, sardines, and natural cottage cheese became part of a much larger picture. They reminded me to nourish myself with kindness rather than fear. They encouraged me to slow down, to appreciate what nature offers, and to treat every meal as an act of gratitude instead of worry. Just as important were the friendships I chose to keep, the neighbors I tried to help, the faith that carried me through lonely seasons, and the quiet decision I made each morning to remain curious about life. Many people ask me what the greatest secret to growing older well has been. I always give the same answer. I never stopped believing that tomorrow was worth preparing for. Researchers continue studying healthy aging, and many older people believe that purpose, connection, and daily routines may support both body and mind. My own experience has led me to the same conclusion. If you are watching this today and you are over 60, please remember that your story is not finished simply because your hair has turned gray. Today is still a wonderful day to begin one small habit that your future self will quietly thank you for. Before we say goodbye, I would truly love to hear from you. Please share in the comments one healthy habit you are ready to begin tomorrow, no matter how small it may seem. Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. And if you enjoy these heartfelt conversations about healthy aging, natural living, and the simple wisdom gathered across a long life, I would be honored if you subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together.